I was about to start. So I had a an issue with the internet. I couldn't continue with the meeting. I sent few messages through Skype, but because of network problem, they didn't receive. Okay, so there was no class yesterday. Though I started initiated it, but I couldn't continue with the class yesterday. Okay, fine. So today we'll continue a discussion. You know, um, we are about to talk about this around advice, right? So around advice means um, it is basically a combination of before and after returning advice. Before advice and after returning advice, I can say. So, there are few changes which you have to do in this around advice. Make sure that the parameter type is proceeding join point. Instead of join point, you have to use this proceeding join point as a parameter, and there won't be any return value here. Yes, and just a second. Here, in case of around advice, you will find that the control is completely transferred to this advice method itself. Whenever the target is called, first of all, you see this advice method will be invoked by the proxy. Proxy will call this advice method. Yes. And, this advice method will execute any code or any advice code before the target method starts execution. So it will say, I'll print this message. Before the target method starts execution. So this code will execute before the target method starts execution. And if you people remember, we have already gone through this method interceptor earlier. You people are familiar with this method interceptor, I can say actually. Yes. Here you'll find that in the method interceptor, you got that advice type method interceptor, right? So the control is completely transferred to this advice method itself. This advice method itself is responsible for calling the target method. How can this advice method call the target method? We have used a particular method for that. In order to call the target method, we have used a particular method. What is it? Which method used to call the target method? There was a method which was used to call the target method. We have implemented method interceptor interface, right? And in that, you got a method called as invoke, which we have overridden, and that invoke method is advice method. In that advice method, we have invoked through that in that invoke method, we were able to call the target method. How we can call the target method? We had a method for that target method. In order to call the target method, there was a method actually. What is that method? What is the target method? Proceed. Here, you see, you got a proceed method which you have to use. Proceed method. Okay. Yes. In the proceed method, what it does, it will call the target method. Proceed method will call the target method. Okay. Yes. Now the target method, once it finishes execution, it may return a value. The target method, once it is done executing, it may return a value, right? Yes. So whatever the value the target method returns, that value in turn will be returned by this proceed method. Okay, so you can take that value, object return value. Yes. Make sure that here, actually this proceed method throws a checked exception. You have to add this throws clause here, throws throwable. Yeah. So you know what? When this statement finishes execution, I can say that the target method has finished execution. And if you got any code which you won't execute after the target method finishes execution, if you got any code, if you won't execute after the target method finishes execution, then you can write this code after the proceed method call. You can write the code after this proceed method call. Okay, yes. So I'll write the code. See, after method finishes execution. That's it. You're done. Now we'll try to test this code. So here we'll be calling the process method. We'll be applying the advice to the process method. Okay, example service dot start. So this indicates that okay, it includes the process method also. So this advice code will execute for the process method. Okay, yes. So let's run this code. Yes, you can check this. You see, first of all, the advice code will execute. So it says execute before execution process method. You see the process method before the process method executes. Here that advice code is executing. Then the process method is invoked. You see here after the process method finishes execution, again the advice code is executing. Okay, yes, the advice code is executing. Now there is one important point here. Make sure that whatever the value the target method returns, that value we have to return this advice method has to return that value. The advice method has to return the value here. Yes. What are the value? The target method returns. You see, using the proceed method, we are calling the target method. So once the target method finishes execution, it returns a value, right? So we are storing that value in this variable, return value variable. In turn, we'll return that value here. Yes. That is how it works. Okay. You know, what if we don't call the proceed method? What happens? What do you people think? What if we don't call the proceed method? Then what happens? Yes, what if we don't call the proceed method? What happens? Now, if we don't call the proceed method, then in that case, the target method will not be invoked. You'll find that the target method is not invoked here. Okay, so using this proceed method itself, we are calling the target method. Okay, hope you people got it. Just a second. So now, once again, let's try to quickly understand in which cases we'll use this type of advice. Okay, right. So, here, you'll find that there are certain cross-cutting concerns for which we can use this advice. Can you people tell me for which cross cross-cutting concerns we can use this advice? For which cross-cutting concerns we can use this advice? Yes. For which cross-cutting concern we can use this advice? Yes. Logging and transaction management. Yes, that's right. Just a second, please. Just a second. So transaction management, and there is one more cross-cutting concern, one more type of advice for which this kind of advices can be applied, can be used. There is one more type of cross-cutting concern where we can use this type of advice. What is it? Yes, security. For security also we can apply it. Okay, fine. Now, here you see how we can apply this advice code for transaction management. You may have that doubt. Okay, just I'll try to clarify it. And actually, we will be practically using this time transaction management example. We got a uh, classes for this in Spring, okay, which we'll be using. But before that, let me just brief you on this. Let's say you got this process method, right? And in the process method, I got some DB operations and all. Okay, I got set of instructions which I want to execute. Okay, as a transaction. So I want to make sure that this process method, it executes under the transaction context. I want to make sure that I want to execute this code under the transaction context. Okay, I want to execute this code under the transaction context. So how do I do that? You know what? If you want to execute this method, process method under the transaction context, you want to make what to do? I want to make sure that the process method executes under the transaction context. So what to do? So for that, here what you have to do is here you have to start the transaction before the target method starts execution. Before the target method starts execution, what you have to do, you have to start the transaction. So how to start the transaction here? Yes, it depends which type of API or framework you're using. For suppose, let's say in the process method, I'm using Hibernate. Assume that I'm using Hibernate here in the process method. So if that is the case, then what I'll do? Yes. So I will obtain that transaction object using the session and all, right? So we'll do this. So I'll just write that code here. I'll comment it. It won't work because I'm not using Hibernate here. So let's say I'll just do this. Let's say this is the code I would like to do. I'll try to execute session dot begin transaction. So which will start the transaction and return the transaction object reference, right? Yes. And then here You see, once the transaction starts, okay, we'll call this proceed method. What happens? The proceed method will make sure that the process method, the target method is invoked. And you know what? Here, the target method will execute within the transaction which you have obtained here, which you have started here. Okay. And once the proceed method finishes, the target method finishes execution, again the control will be written back to this advice method, right? Yes, the control will be written back to this advice method here. Yes. So you see, once the control is written back to this advice method, okay, once this proceed method finishes execution, that means the target method has finished execution. You can write the code here to commit the transaction. Transaction, sorry, again I'll comment it. Transaction dot commit. Yes. See here, this way, okay, we can apply an advice. Fine. But we'll see this practically, though we won't implement that transaction management because we got some predefined code which is provided by the Spring which we'll be using. Okay, so far we have developed the aspects, right? Okay, this is another type of aspect. This is around advice. We saw around advice, and what else we saw? Before advice, right? And we saw after returning advice. Now we'll see the third type of advice here, throws advice. I think we have discussed about throws also, right? Yeah. So we saw throws advice last class. Wednesday before yesterday's class. Please just uh, try to recollect. Did we talk about throws advice? I'm sure we have discussed about before and after returning. But I didn't remember about throws advice. Did we talk about throws advice? Just check once and let me know. Did we talk about throws advice? Here in aspects. Earlier in AOP we discussed about throws advice, but here did we do this throws advice? Okay, so let us talk about it. It's not a big deal. So here, if it is throws advice, make sure that first of all the parameter type is join point again, not point proceeding join point. Only for around advice will this proceeding join point. Okay, and here we change this to throws advice. You got an aberration. Sorry. I think it's after throwing, I'm sorry. After throwing. After throwing. But basically it is throws advice itself. Here the annotation which we use is throws after throwing. Yes. Now, here, why do we use after throwing or throws advice? Throws advice, why do we use it? Yes. Why do we use throws advice? To handle an exception, that's right. So if you want to handle an exception, then you will use throws advice. That's right. Here, what type of exception you want to handle, those details will provide them here itself. Okay. Yes. So first of all, you have to slightly modify the code point cut. And, now, what type of exception you want to handle? You need to declare it as a parameter. Let's say I want to handle, SQL exception. I want to handle SQL exception. So if I want to handle SQL exception, let me see, I'll declare it here as a parameter. Then I have to register that parameter name using an attribute called throwing. Throwing equal to that parameter name exception. That variable name or parameter name you have to declare it here. That's it. You're done. So this way, you'll configure this advice. So whenever there is an exception in the target method, whenever there is an exception in the target method, then this advice code will execute. Okay, only when there is an exception in the target method, okay, this advice code will execute. Yep. So this way, using this advice separately, we can handle the exceptions. Yeah, we don't, so because exception handling code is also the most common cross-cutting concern code which you'll see, right? Yes. Here, there's a reason why we can handle the exceptions. Okay, we can just contain this cross-cutting concern code. We can contain the cross-cutting concern code using this type of advice here. That exception handling code, which is a cross-cutting concern code, we can contain it using this type of advice. Okay, fine. So now, so far we saw that we can apply or we can configure this aspect details. Okay, we can configure the aspect details using this annotation stuff, right? We have used annotations for this. So I'm sorry. The thing is here, using XML also, you can configure these aspects. Using XML also, we can configure this aspect. Now let's see how to do that. Okay. So for that, first of all, I will comment these annotations. That means now we didn't configure them as aspects now. Okay. Yes. You see. So let's see how to configure this aspects in the XML file or in the Spring Bean configuration file. So here in the XML file, in order to configure an aspect, okay, first you have to use this element called as AOP config. You have to use this element called as AOP config. Now here, you see there is a sub element called as aspect. You know, this aspect annotation is actually equivalent to this aspect element. The aspect element is equivalent to aspect annotation. Earlier we have used aspect annotation, right? So here this annotation is equivalent to that. Now you have to configure the details about the aspect here. Using the annotation, what we did, oops, the cursor is not working. Just a second. Oh. Hello, are you people able to hear me? Hello? Can you people hear me? Yeah, I think actually my cursor is stuck here. Yeah, just let me do one thing. Let me restart the machine, please. Wait for a while, okay? Yeah, so my cursor is not working. Just wait.